to tell you about a time when I had a stent placed in my right coronary artery and it got blocked, and they had to take me to the operating room in Salem Hospital. And I wasn't a bit afraid. I knew the Lord was with me and taking care of me. My son was with me, and he sat beside me and held my hand, and I said, I'm not afraid. I know God is taking care of me, and he did bring me through the surgery. And I'm healthy and strong now. Thank you, Lord.
God showed up in my life when I was only a tiny baby, and I'd like to tell you that story. My dad was crushed by a Ford garage door that he worked in Eugene, Oregon, when I was born, or just before I was born. And my mother was pregnant with me, and as soon as I was born, she had to go back to work because my dad was laid up in bed and unable to move with a broken back. When she went back to work, my dad was in bed. My 4-year-old sister would bring bottles, baby bottles full of milk for me to drink, and my diapers, she would bring those also to my dad. And my mother was working and teaching next door in the school. And God showed up to help because he would bring people from our church, and they would come over and pick me up at noon because my dad couldn't get out of bed. And I needed to be fed at least once a day by my mother, who was breastfeeding. And they would take me over to the school, and my mother would go out into the hall, and she would feed me while she was on her lunch break. And then the church would bring me back to my dad and put me in bed with him where he was so desperately ill. And I remember as I grew older and I heard this story, I asked my mother how she did it. And she said, God gave me the strength and the church helped me. And I just think she was an extraordinary woman of grace. And I'm so thankful she was my mother.
Well, many of you remember the building that used to be on this site, and some of you actually helped build it. It was beautiful to look at. The sanctuary was splendid, but the roof leaked a lot. Classrooms and offices had no windows. They had little ventilation. The gym was great, and the classrooms below the gym were good. It was a challenge to do God's ministry in this place, and besides that, at that time, the congregation was recovering from divisive pain from some hard times it had gone through. That's when God stepped in. He stepped in the form of a disturbed young man who set fires. He set several fires. One was the one that burned Immanuel's building down. Everything from the gym wall over was gone. At that time, the congregation learned that the church is not the building, it's the people in the church. God made it possible for the congregation to have this present building. The windows in this building look out, and the congregation has been transformed. It's been inspired to reach out in so many, many ways. God steps in sometimes in what looks like tragedy, but in hindsight, it's a blessing.
I guess my experience from seeing the face of God, one thing I can think of, two incidences, I guess. Back in January of 2013 was the first time Patty and I attended Immanuel, and it was kind of a rough patch in my life because of things that were going on at our previous church, and I'd stopped going to church basically, and so that means Patty and I weren't going to church together. And one Saturday evening I was laying in bed and I happened to think of Immanuel Lutheran Church because my dad knew Pastor Leah from previous association, and I said, well, to Patty, why don't we go out and try Immanuel, see what that's like. And so we came the next Sunday morning, and when we got to the part where we do communion, and Pastor Leah said, all are welcome, the Lord's table is ready, everyone is welcome. In our previous church, there was a statement in the bulletin that basically said, if you don't believe completely the way we believe, please stay seated in your pew. And that really touched me and made me want to come back. And so we did. And then about a month later, it was when Halfway Home was performing, and they started into their music, and I thought, oh my goodness, are you allowed to do that in church? That beautiful music, because I'm kind of a bluegrass fan and really enjoyed listening to it. But it was another example of, I believe, God's face or presence in a difficult situation.
I am remembering a time when I didn't see the face of God, but I heard the voice of God very directly. It was a time when things were not really good between my husband and me, and he was gone a lot. And I was meditating and praying that night, and I heard the voice of God, specific words in my head. God said, "You're okay. You know that I love you. Leave him to me."
My story is about my younger days, going back to about 1958. I was in the trucking business. I had my own tractor, leased to a rental company. This particular load that I had, I started in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and this company had numerous outlets in different cities. And the time where I know that God was with me, I was hauling a load of forklift trucks, probably about 36,000 pounds total. I was on 41 going after Chattanooga, and there's a large hill there. In fact, it's a mountain. And I'm going up this mountain with this load, and I only had a gas tractor. And when I'm nearing, about a half a mile from the top, I was running out of power. And when the meter went under 1,500 RPMs down to 1,400 and 1,200 RPMs, I knew I was in big trouble. And about the time I thought, this is it, all of a sudden I started picking up speed, because behind me was a trucker with a huge diesel tractor, and he pushed me up the hill. When I got up on top of the hill, there was a truck stop and a restaurant, and needless to say, I bought his lunch. But only God was with me that day, because otherwise I never would have got up that hill. So I never forgot that episode.